Hey everyone, it's been 7 days since my last video, and I must confess, there's a bigger badass on the internet than I am. Hi, I'm Diana Davison. I want to talk to you this week about the work of Janice Fiamengo. Janice is a professor at the University of Ottawa, and through Studio Brûlé does a video every week exposing the dishonesty and corruption of academic feminism. I'll put a link to the playlist of Season 1 and 2 of the Fiamengo Files below, and I suggest that you watch all of them. Not only is the research solid and enlightening, but Janice makes me laugh at least once in every episode, so go find your favorite Janice moments.
When I was a student, I dreamed of being an animal rights terrorist. I wanted to break the beagles out of the science lab on campus. I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa. What a letdown it's been.
Now, I've been doing a lot of videos uncovering the fraud behind the recent trial and persecution of Ghomeshi in Canada, and Professor Fiamengo did her own video on the subject, making some very astute observations. In this trial, despite all odds, John managed to positively prove that all three women accusing him of sexual assault were lying. As Janice says,
The trial told a story that in a sane world would have delivered a body blow to feminism, revealing so much that is wrong with the believe the women doctrine. But the feminist juggernaut wasn't checked by these revelations of lies, foolishness, and self-sabotage. If anything, feminists seemed galvanized, using the spectacle of women fawning all over the man who supposedly assaulted them to assert their unshakable faith in female truthfulness.
and that's exactly what we saw happening. As more and more shocking evidence of deception was presented in court, the newspapers and blogs quickly filled with nonsense about how women's actions often don't match their words, and how courts of law should be redesigned to assess women's credibility. As Janice notes,
Outright lying proves a woman's complexity. It's as if these women were characters in a feminist novel, rather than complainants bound by legal oath and seeking to have a man locked away in jail for years.
and that's one of the points I've tried to make. I don't think the women actually comprehend the seriousness of someone going to prison. They seemed sure that he wouldn't, and some analysts have said that as a first-time offender, Ghomeshi probably would have gotten off lightly if he was convicted. And you can see how this rationalization made them think that what happened to him wasn't that bad, and it wasn't all that serious that the women had lied. As one accuser, Lucy Ducater, said, "This is theater at its best." And that's what this is to Lucy, to Linda Redgrave, and to the third accuser, who are all probably right now thinking, oh well, better luck next time. After Ghomeshi miraculously provided the evidence that his accusers were lying, feminists think he got away with something. They act as if he's skipping down the street now, tra-la-la-la-la, instead of sitting at home trying to figure out if there are any pieces of his life that can still somehow be salvaged. Nevertheless, to feminists, and sadly to much of the population, a man can never prove his innocence, and they still refer to these liars and frauds as victims.
And we see this sleight of hand already in practice with the use of the words victim or survivor rather than complainant when referring to perjured witnesses, as in this case.
This trial, instead of being a wake-up call to feminists that they need to concern themselves with fair trials, drove them in the opposite direction. Calls rang out for new court systems designed just for sexual assault cases. Shockingly, this hybrid court was not only supported by a number of lawyers, but seems to have been designed by them. These are feminist lawyers looking to make a name for themselves in the history books, and they're pushing their shiny new brand of equality at us, as if they are the messengers from God, finally here to solve the problem of people having sex with each other.
A system proud of its inequality and calling it a higher equality, a restorative equality.
Yes, restorative justice based on a thing called substantive equality. If you haven't heard of substantive equality, it means nobody is equal and the law only applies to some people. And that's the kind of equality the Canadian justice system has already signed on to. I'll link to an article by John Hembling which explains this a little better. But Janice brought up some problems with Justice William B. Horkin's decision in the first Ghomeshi trial, and I want to address them.
The judgment is, in my opinion, deeply influenced by the feminist narrative about how victims of sexual trauma cannot be judged according to reasonable standards. Influenced to such an extent that the judgment sets a very grave precedent for future cases, perhaps even future cases against Ghomeshi.
Because of the word precedent, I just want to mention briefly here that those precedents have already been set, and Justice Horkins was confined by them when he wrote his decision.
The judge's comment on these suppressions is, in my opinion, ominously careful. He wrote, quote, "A natural assumption might be that what was actually stopping Ms. de Coutere from sharing all of this undisclosed information was the fear that to some audiences this post-event socializing would reflect badly on her claims that this man had in fact assaulted her. Had she genuinely feared that this sort of thinking would unfairly undermine her credibility, that concern might have been an explanation worth giving careful consideration." That's the end of the quotation. I don't know what to make of that. I find it striking that the judge states only that Ms. de Coutere's behavior might have undermined her credibility with, quote, some audiences. Surely what is germane to the case is not how some audiences might react. The question is whether a reasonable person would find on balance that Ms. de Coutere's behavior drastically weakened her claim.
And that is the one area in which the courts have been able to continue a semblance of justice. Judges are, for the most part, rational people. It's also why Jian Ghomeshi would not have had a fair trial if he'd elected to have a jury. But I'm sure feminism is working on fixing that.
Here, feminists demand that the law get into murky regions of the female psyche where no reason-based system can or should go.
That there is one of the reasons I love Janice so much. She's absolutely right. If women can't be understood or assessed for credibility because they have a psyche so muddled and disordered that they act inconsistently all the time, then courts of justice should not cater to them. They cannot cater to them, not without giving up the word reasonable in all of their guidelines.
According to the feminists, practically any assumption of how a female sexual assault victim would likely behave is a stereotype. And if we are not to judge on the basis of stereotypes, how can we judge any behavior? After all, judges and juries in a court of law don't know victims personally. They can't judge on the basis of years of intimate knowledge.
Now, Janice goes on to talk a bit about what kind of model feminists might supplant reasonableness with, and how that would be just another stereotype. The main point here is that we are meant to believe, despite readily available evidence, that women never lie about sexual assault. So there is no need to assess their credibility, according to feminists.
So the judge's statement makes no sense to me, and it concedes, in my opinion, far too much to a feminist theory in which women's behavior can be both irrational and yet credible at the same time.
Obviously, judges need something to base their judgments on, so it must have been a struggle for Justice Horkins to come to a conclusion, given that the behavior of the women is already out of bounds for his assessment. The only reason any of the evidence of the women's lies was allowed into court in the first place was because they'd made contradictory claims going into the trial. If Justice Horkins hadn't focused on the suppression of evidence but on the behavior itself, his decision would likely have been appealed. I agree completely with Janice's conclusion.
And that's how law is destroyed and innocent men convicted.
And sadly, we're already there.
We're at the point now where nothing a female complainant says or does can be used to disprove her allegation of sexual assault.
Now, these changes happened when no one was paying attention. It's time to start paying attention. And Janice gives us, from another video, a really good reason to start caring.
I don't want to live any longer in a culture in which I and most people submit to lies about women's victimization and male privilege. It feels crazy and sick.
So this is my message to the Hotrod of anti-feminism, Janice Fiamengo. Janice, don't despair. We eat little shits like these SJW twits for breakfast.
Soon I discovered that this rock thing was true. Jesus was the devil. All of a sudden, I found myself in love with the world. So there was only one thing that I could do, was ding-a-ding-dang, my dang-along-ling-long. Jesus built my car. It's a love affair, mainly Jesus and my hot rod.